Hi everyone, welcome back to the show with your host, me, Luke Burrows, and I'm really excited to bring to you today's episode. Before we dive into it though, I want to share that this episode is brought to you by Riverside, which is a all-in-one recording and editing platform. Literally, you can do everything in Riverside, from recording your content, whether that's podcast episodes, webinars, videos, or more, to editing them using their suite of AI tools, to publishing them directly to the podcast platforms or social media networks that you want to share your content on. It's literally the all-in-one platform that you need for content creation. I've been using Riverside for years now and have found the platform to be a game changer in my content creation efforts and have saved me so much time, especially with their suite of AI tools, AI show notes, magic clips, game changer. So if you want to get started with Riverside, I have good news. You can do so today by using my unique code, Luke Burrows, for 15% off a paid subscription plan and clicking the link in the show notes of this episode. I would highly recommend that you do so if you want to up your content creation game, whether you are a podcaster, content creator, somewhere in between at any level, seasoned pro, beginner, it doesn't matter. Riverside is there to help you with producing your content. Head to that link in the show notes, use code LuBurrows, my name, for a discount, 15% off a paid plan or subscription. And without further ado, guys, let's hop on over into this episode of the podcast. In this episode, Rich Ahlers is back as we take a deep dive into Bloodwork. We explore the key metrics that you need to look out for when getting labs done. And Rich provides a deep dive into why each lab, each metric on your lab sheet is important, exploring the science behind each one and the optimal ranges to look for. Now, a disclaimer that this is not medical advice. Please do go and see your doctor for medical advice on this topic. But with Rich's experience and knowledge within the health field, over 20 years of experience, he is somebody that I trust when it comes to looking at not just blood work or labs, but actually somebody to go to for looking at our health from a holistic perspective. So this episode is not medical advice, it's Rich's experience, Rich's knowledge put into an episode focusing on labs, focusing on blood work, and I look forward to sharing it with you. So let's dive into it. Rich, welcome back to Raising Consciousness. How have you been since our last conversation?
Thanks, Luke. Yeah, I'm excited to be back. I've been good, thanks. Summer's been good, spending time with the family and kids and trying to get outside while the weather's nice. So we've had a great summer. What about yourself?
That's good. No, it's been good. Like we were talking beforehand, before we went live, of how it goes fast and how we've kind of wanted to have some downtime, but then like 2 hours in, is like, actually no, screw downtime. Like we have to do something. So
Yep.
Maybe a
Idle
lot of our
hands.
audience can. Yeah, exactly. Maybe a lot of our audience can relate to that. But summer's good. Have you like been away, or like do you normally go away in the summer? What's your normal summer plans?
Yeah, so normal summer plans. We usually stay local. This summer, I'm actually headed to Sicily with my oldest daughter. So we're going to be going out to Sicily for 8 days to do a little excursion and some property hunting for potential retirement and investment. So we have a special little trip, which is nice. I'm looking forward to that.
That's great, man. That's great. Well, it's a pleasure to have you back on the podcast. This time, we had kind of alluded to it last time in the last episode that you were on, and I'll link that episode down below. We alluded to the fact we were doing an episode on blood work, and here we are doing that episode. So start from the beginning with like blood work. Like, what is it and why does it matter?
Yeah. So it's funny. Like I think I shared in the last podcast. Like I spent a good, 20 years plus in healthcare. But I remember, going back, just doing your annual physicals for me was just kind of a passive thing, right? Like you're kind of taught, like, do your annual physicals, get your blood work, and get your checkup. And admittedly, probably like most people, I was just getting lab work done, trusting the physician to just run the labs and then tell me if everything's okay, and just kind of out of sight, out of mind. It just wasn't something I focused on or really understood. And it wasn't until like I started having more experiences with my family, having health issues and my own health issues, that I started to take it more seriously and try to understand why this is important. And so I think, to answer your question, the reason why lab work, I think, is really crucial, especially for people as they age, right? So if you're 30 plus, this really applies because things start to change in your body as we age. And the lab work gives you a really clear snapshot in time of exactly what's going on internally in your body. And sometimes we can tap into feeling certain things and understanding that we don't feel right or we're off, but the lab works really give you a clear depiction of why you may be having symptoms, or even stuff that you're not even having symptoms of, right? Like if you just look at like getting your blood pressure checked, which is not necessarily tied to lab work, but it's part of your checkup. One of the biggest things that are silent killers is blood pressure. And so it's really important for people to go to a physician at least once a year to get this checkup. And the big part of it is getting the lab work done to really understand your health.
So from what I understand about lab work, is that it can cover quite a range of different metrics, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So talk us through that. What are some of the like, I guess, the biggest or the most important things that we need to look for when we are getting our lab work done?
Yeah, so it does. There's there's a ton of panels that they'll cover, like CMP, which is your cardiometabolic panel, your CBC, which is your blood panel, right? Your white cells, your red cells, your platelets, your plasma, hormone function, inflammation markers, iron and ferritin. So there's just, your liver function, so AST, ALT, all these things that some people may not know or may know. So yeah, your standard lab panels actually have a lot in them that cover the board of, your top biomarkers that look at your health. And then there's even other things like vitamin D and if you want to get further, like your nutritional or vitamin levels, your cortisol levels, and you can kind of really start to get in the weeds when you start to add some more of the esoteric testing, which is more the unique stuff.
And so with that, I can imagine a lot of people can be maybe, if they're quite a person that gets overwhelmed easily and maybe anxious easily, they're like, oh shit, like all these different things. What would you say are like some of the biggest movers, and at what level do people need to kind of understand this, as well? Because I don't want people to become overwhelmed. Like if they go and get their lab work done, it's like, there's a long list. It's like, actually, what does like all this mean? So what are some of like the biggest movers, and what level do people need to understand this at to make healthy choices and healthy changes in their life?
Yeah, it's funny because I was that person too. Even somebody working in healthcare talking about this stuff, I still would look at these panels when it would be a readout, and I'm like, I don't even know where to start with this. What does it mean? You got all these ranges, there's these goals, and like sideline a little bit here, but I remember selling lipid lowering medication many, many years ago in my early career. And we used to talk about targeted goals, where to get the lipids down to, total cholesterol, and what you want the LDL to be. And, of course I knew enough to be dangerous, but then when I would look at these readouts of my own, I'm like, this is so overwhelming. I'm just going to trust the physician to read these for me. So I think the first part is, and we kind of talked about this the last time, is that when I started to go through my own things, I started to realize you could become your own doctor. Now, I'm not saying you are a doctor. I'm not saying on paper you have a degree as being an MD, but you could start to learn simple things about your lab work to get really good at understanding your own health. And that helps you take more of a leadership role or accountability role in your health. So I think one of the biggest ones for people, and right now we see it in our world, we have an obesity epidemic. Americans, at least, I think about 70 to 80% of people are considered obese at this point in time, and that number is growing. So the first thing you want to look at is your blood sugar. Your blood sugar is a very easy marker to look at, and it gives you an understanding of what your your fasting blood sugar is. Now, when you go to do a lab test, you want to fast because you want an accurate readout. If you eat something and then you get lab work done, you're going to have blood sugar changes because of whatever you ingested, and that's not going to give you a true measurement. So it's encouraged, obviously, to do a 12-hour fast or longer before you do blood work. But what you want to look for your blood sugar is to be under 90. Now, the medical world has always said up to 99. And what's funny is sometimes the medical world is more aggressive with numbers and sometimes they're less aggressive with numbers. And I think, I don't want to go into like the education around that, but what's really important is that you want to look at your number to be 90 or less. Because once you get to the 99 mark, you're actually going into pre-diabetic situations. You don't want to be pre-diabetes. So 90 or less. As a matter of fact, I just did my blood work 2 days ago, and mine was 89, which is creeping to the 90. So I just have to watch. Now, I don't eat a lot of sugar at all, or even white sugar or processed foods, but I could talk a little bit about that actually later on after we go through some of the labs. But not everything has to do with food. So I'm just going to leave it at that. But your fasting blood sugar, under 90. The other thing that you want to look at that's related to this is what's called HbA1c. This is your 2 to 3 month look back of your blood sugar over the course of, like, let's say a quarter, right? And you want that number to be less. The standard is less than 5.7%. But try to get 5, right? 5 or less, I think is better, because blood sugar is one of the major biomarker components that impacts health. So diabetes, obesity, mental health issues, neurocognitive diseases like Alzheimer's, because we've now seen in the research over the last 5-10 years that Alzheimer's is considered type 3 diabetes. So there's a blood sugar issue there. So also say your fasting blood sugar under 90 and your HbA1c, let's see, less than 5.
And if you were to choose, so if we were to do the top 3, so we've got blood sugar, was it HbA1c? What would be the, to kind of round it off, a third marker?
A third
to kind of
one,
look at?
let's probably take a hormone, which would be insulin. So insulin resistance is another contributor to disease. And generally you want that to be, they say 2 to 10, but from what I've seen, you want that to be under 5. And usually
it's interesting. Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's interesting because they're all, so my range of knowledge is insulin is also related to diabetes, right? So they're all kind of linked in some way, which is interesting. They're the top 3 and all linked in some way. So would you say these are the 3 that so these are the 3 that are linked, obviously the biggest link to diabetes, but also other chronic illnesses that we face in society?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because, up until the point I studied Chinese medicine, I was always taught the conventional model, the allopathic model of everything's in silos. Heart, go see a heart doctor. Liver, go see a liver doctor. Brain, go see a brain doctor. But what you're calling out is something that I learned as I looked at Chinese medicine, and why I think it actually works very well, is because everything talks to each other within your system. And if one brick pulls out somewhere, you're going to have a transition somewhere else in an organ system. And so what you're pointing to is actually correct. Everything impacts everything within our system. We're one holistic system. The other thing is, a couple other things that are probably to call out here is that what you see in the literature that I found out in my own journey, because when I was put on a statin, looking at cholesterol, and Peter Attia is probably a good place to look at. If you're really into the science, you could look up the straight dope of cholesterol. It's a 5-part blog, and it's very extensive and scientific. But if you want to read that, you can. But what I found out is that not only does blood sugar contribute to some of these other conditions, but it also contributes to atherosclerotic plaque. And the reason why is that there's buildup through having erratic sugar levels and maybe some inflammation that contributes to arterial damage. And so basically eating a lot of sugar, is going to contribute to heart disease. So you can see that it's just contributing to almost every single disease that we experience, like these 3 things and other factors that I'll talk about. But those are big. Like if you want to start anywhere, start with your diet, with your blood sugar, your sugar intake, your alcohol intake, things that are spiking and dropping your blood sugar, sugary drinks, things like that.
And what does the process look like for those that, so let's say we take an individual now, obviously you've recently had your lab work done. So you go to a physician, like walk us through what the process actually looks like for like the average person. Because I believe like you can also like, can you get it done at home or like a kit sitting at home? What do you recommend? Like walk us through the standard process of this.
Yeah. So standard process is people will set up an appointment to go see their physician in an office and get their lab work done. And generally that's going to be a high level look at like your blood pressure, like I talked about, them empirically looking at you, asking you questions, and then drawing labs. And then once they get the labs, they read them to you, results over the phone, or you go in to make another appointment with your physician and they go through it with you there. And then they either say, medication, recommendations, lifestyle management, which some of them lightly do give some lifestyle management advice. The second way is to kind of your point. Now, over the last like 5-7 years, there's been a lot of direct consumer products that have made this easier for people to get lab work. There's companies like Blokes and Joy, Function Health, Everlywell, Mosaic, and all these have different offerings. Some offer just the lab testing with basically an MD that signs off on all the prescriptions for the lab work, or you're signing up for some type of membership with that company to get the kit and the home testing. So it really depends on what people want, right? Like some companies may offer coaching, some may offer nutritional and supplement advice on top of what your labs will say. So you need to kind of pick what you want. My advice is if you can do just a home testing kit and work with a functional doctor directly, that's the best route, because I feel like you need to have a patient-provider relationship. And I think it's much easier to have that one-on-one versus someone sending you a bunch of information passively to go do, right? You need someone to guide you. But those are some of the options. And there's a lot more on my Bloodwork cheat sheet that I give out, which I think you'll include in the notes here. But there's a couple different options that people can do.
So someone listening to this have gone and get some lab work done. It's come back that maybe their blood sugar is over 90, insulin is, over 5, and ABC1 is also over 5. Obviously, we're not going to give medical kind of advice, etc. But then, so they get that results. Maybe they're a bit like panicked by that, like, oh shit, am I going to die, or something, so maybe a bit extreme, but you know what I mean? Like, like sometimes when we get results back, we go into that kind of worried, kind of fear like state, right? So when they get that back, like what's your recommendation for people? Obviously, again, we're not going to give medical advice, but words of encouragement, words of wisdom that you would give to people when they get those results back. Because sometimes, especially if it's a home kit or something, maybe they're not speaking with someone until like a few hours or the next day or however the process works. And I can imagine like when they get those numbers back, it's a bit like, oh shit,
So that's the first part. So I would say if you're someone that gets anxious about labs, definitely go to a physician and have them do them and have them review them with you. If you're someone that can handle it because you know that it's not the end of the world and you can manage that anxiety, then by all means do it on your own. One thing I want to say is that while disease can happen, the human body is very resilient. And so if you're getting ahead of things on your lab work before you have signs or symptoms, that's amazing. That's what you want to be doing. You don't want to be doing it after the fact. However, even when you have things like diabetes, risk of cardiac disease, mental health conditions, maybe predisposition to neurocognitive diseases, neurodegenerative diseases, it doesn't mean you're going to get them. It doesn't mean you're going to get them now. This is why lab work is so important. What your lab work does is it gives you a roadmap or breadcrumbs to follow and go, wait a minute, I can intervene and take a new path here and change it. So again, not medical advice, but these are things to think about. The other thing is that usually, most times, you can reverse these chronic conditions. Okay, so if they're not genetic, if they're not too far gone, you can reverse them. So if you're having issues with blood sugar, you're having issues with lipids, which I think we should talk about cholesterol after this and the hormones and stuff. But if you're having issues with this, the number one thing to do is simply move every day so that you can get your body and your system functioning correctly, and change the way you eat. So what I mean by that is, if you're someone who's eating processed foods, foods out of bags and boxes, sugary drinks, soda, alcohol, fried foods, these types of things that we know are not good for us, but we like them, those need to be removed from the diet. And you want to replace those with dark leafy greens, fruits and vegetables, healthy proteins and fats, water with electrolytes, which would be sea salt. You really don't even need these electrolyte packages that people sell you unless you're like a huge high performer. Just put some nice sea salt into your water and drink that. Even things like cinnamon help with blood sugar regulation. They also help with arterial function. So you could be adding cinnamon into your diet. Flaxseed, right? Flaxseed is really great. And other types of grains like chia that help move some of your lipids and help with blood sugar. So there's things like this that you could be incorporating. But very simply is just change your diet. Shop the perimeter of the grocery store, not in the middle where all the junk food lies. And if you do that, if you're sticking to things that look natural in their form, you're going to be able to regulate your blood sugar. The last thing I'll say is that there's a lot of like conflicting science around fasting and eating windows. Simple advice is this: eat your 2 or 3 square meals a day, make sure they're real, and try not to eat past 7, 8 o'clock so that you get a 12-hour fasting window. And you'll help regulate your blood sugar through that, because you're giving your body time to rest and digest and not constantly consume and get blood sugar eradication.
Yeah, great
and
advice
then
there.
one other thing I would add too, if I can, Luke.
Yeah, sure.
If somebody has something that's more dramatic, like if their numbers are really, they're higher, then you could also ask your physician for a CGM, which is a blood glucose monitor. And they could either prescribe something like an Abbott Freestyle or a Dexcom, or you can apply to Levels or NutriSense and get a wearable so that you can be tracking your blood sugar. Again, caution to the wind. If you're someone that's very anxious about seeing metrics all the time, like we talked about with wearables, then maybe that's not the right move for you. Or you send your data to your physician to read, but you don't get access to it. These are ways that you can also, get your health under wraps.
Yeah, one final point on the blood sugar kind of point and everything before we move on to, as you said, lipids and cholesterol, was that you said that you're approaching 90 and that not everything has to therefore do with food, which I found interesting and wanted to come back to, because I think that there's this symbiotic relationship we think about kind of within kind of culture that gets spoken about, is that the biggest impact on our blood sugar and kind of insulin and the ABC, was it HbA1c? That's it. Is our nutrition and diet and basically food, right? So for somebody who obviously like yourself, who shops are, as you said, around not in the middle, that doesn't eat processed sugar and etc., and to be approaching that number 90, like from your experience, like what else is going on? Like, are there other factors, not just food?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up, because this is something I didn't know and I learned on my own, which I've talked about and is now coming to the forefront: stress. So chronic stress or prolonged periods of stress actually change your biochemistry. And stress could be caused by inflammation in the body, by things we're eating, but it also could be caused by stress in your life, mental stress, physical stress, things that are, and I think we talked about this too, is like, if you're overworking out, you're putting stress on your body. Just as much as being sedentary is not good for your health, overworking out, constantly working out, is stress on the body. mental stress, work stress, family life, life stress, all of these things contribute to your biomarkers changing, like your blood sugar and your lipids, and even hormone function. And adrenal fatigue and things. These are all connected. And I think it's hard for people to understand. It was hard for me to understand, but once I kind of dove into this, I think it's very simple, and hopefully I don't lose people. Everybody experiences stress. How long they experience it and how resilient they are with it, and if they have tools to manage it, matter. We can't avoid it, but we can work with it. And so when stress happens, we hit a cascade in the body called the HPA axis. And I'm going to try not to lose people here. But what's really important is I found that the vagus nerve, which is the 10th cranial nerve that runs from the brainstem all the way down into all your organs, is one of the biggest pieces to our health. It's one of the golden secrets or the golden lock to all of this because it regulates your nervous system. So if you can do breath work, meditation, yoga, chanting, humming, dancing, shaking, anything to exercise, you're going to tap into hitting the vagal nerve. You're creating vagal tone. And the vagal nerve runs into your heart, runs into your lungs, runs into your gut, and basically helps you regulate body functions. And when you do that, you turn the body from a sympathetic state to a parasympathetic state. And what's important about this is that when you use the vagus nerve to go into parasympathetic, you're going to arrest and digest, which means you're turning off the stress response. This is like crazy because I never knew any of this until I started reading that basically you could change your biology by going into using your training vagal tone essentially. So it's long-winded. Hopefully I didn't lose anybody on that, but stress causes a good amount of issues in our body, even if we're eating healthy, and we just need to be aware of it and manage it.
So are practices like breathwork, meditation, yoga, etc., like the main way we train vagal tone?
Yeah, exactly. These are all ways to train vagal tone because if you look at all these practices, what are they doing? Like meditation, breathing, cold plunge, all of them, they're regulating breathing patterns. They're helping you deal with stress on the body acutely. Or if you're in yoga, you're doing poses, and what do they tell you to do? Focus on the quality of your breath, right? They're all ways to tap into nasal breathing, which is the way we want to breathe, nasal in and then exhaling out either through the nose or through the mouth. And when we do that, we are calming the body. This is why they talk about box breathing is good for you, or 4, 7, 8 breaths because you're breathing in but exhaling twice as long. Or if you're sighing, like, this is down-regulating the nervous system to go into parasympathetic, which calms the body. Another way to think about this is like, if we look at like ancient times, if an animal is chasing us or we're under attack by another tribe, we get stressed. And that stress response is supposed to be there because it mobilizes us to go fight or flee or hide. That creates a bunch of different chemicals in the body that shift and prioritize the body for that action. What happens in the common day is we don't have that real threat. We're having psychological threats, work threats, family, whatever, these stressors in the mind that mobilize these things and change our biochemistry. And then we get stuck in these patterns because we don't know how to regulate it, because it's not the same as what used to happen, couple hundred years ago or thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like,
no, it does. It does.
Okay.
I've come across the concept of like acute stress and chronic stress, and so it sounds like from my understanding of that, acute stress is like a short burst of stress and makes us stronger, where chronic stress is pretty much most of our lifestyles now. It's much more longer term and drains our energy and basically causes inflammation and makes us ill. So using the example you gave, would like if I was how many years ago, right, being chased by a saber tiger or whatever, would be that short kind of that short burst of stress that we needed to kind of get away, etc. Where now in our as I said, like in our modern day lifestyles, it's like 24/7. We've always been with this online news all around us. Is that kind of what we're talking about here?
It's exactly what we're talking about. Exactly. Because if you think about it, not to drive this even further, but like we were usually outside most of our day. We were farming, we were building, we were creating, cooking, playing. We weren't inside in front of devices and news and media and social media and phones and work and emails and all this noise. And then you add in the food insults that are also inflammatory and stressful in the body. And it's just like you said, we're just being bombarded by it all day. But the biggest problem is we haven't learned as a species, or haven't been taught really, unless you're self-taught, to be aware of it and then regulate it. So we just allow ourselves to be in the cyclone all day of stress.
How does stress affect the other metrics or like kind of measurements within lab work? Are there?
Yeah.
I'm sure it affects many, but like, what are the key ones that you've kind of seen from research?
Yeah. So kind of going back to the vagus nerve, when you look at how it functions, it has a direct correlation or a connection to a lot of the hormone regulation, cortisol, which is one of the biggest ones, right? Cortisol is one of the biggest insults to our body that when it's run rampant, it can cause a lot of damage. And that's why people talk about adrenal fatigue, because the adrenals sit on top of the kidneys, and there's this whole process. But basically, the vagus nerve is connected to all this, and you can connect to that and train it. But if it's unregulated, if you're unregulating your nervous system or just kind of letting it happen, it's changing your hormone levels, it's changing your biochemistry, it's changing your neurotransmitters that go up to the brain. So this is why people experience depression and anxiety when they're under chronic stress or when they go through a trauma. If they're not regulating their breathing patterns, then the breathing patterns have a direct result to the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve has a direct result to your health and your biochemistry. They're all interconnected. It's probably hard for people to really wrap their mind around this until they start reading step by step. But to answer your question, it impacts almost all of your functions within the body, even your elimination. So your motility in the gut, if you're constipated or not constipated, if people notice when they're anxious, they may eliminate because they're anxious and the body's trying to deplete anything that would hold it back from mobilizing to run. So it's so deep how this goes when we don't regulate, that it's changing all of the functions. Same thing with heart. Like your cardiovascular, when they talk about heart attacks and they talk about heart disease, the old science was to say, oh, it's lipids. But the reality is how much of this is stress? There's a good part of stress that's actually contributing to heart disease and heart attacks. So yeah, I think I'm kind of jumping around, but like it's tied to everything. And once you start to realize, like, if I'm going to be in stressful states, great. And if I have short durations of stressful states, those are good for you because they help you mobilize and they help you train resilience. But you've also got to find times to rest and digest. Walk out in nature, get barefoot, breathe, get away from devices, exercise, spend time with friends, anything to help you bring you back down to let your body go back to homeostasis.
Let's talk lipids and cholesterol because you mentioned it there. So you probably know a lot more about this than I do, but I was listening. I was listening to a Peter Attia podcast, and I don't want to butcher this, but I think he was saying that old science was like cholesterol's bad. There was like lots of stuff in like the media around kind of food products like butter, etc., etc. And when like actually part of the truth in I'll kind of run this by you, is that actually cholesterol is vital for us to like be alive, right? Is a vital thing for us to be alive. So what do people what have people been maybe not lied to is the right phrase, but misinformed when it comes to lipids and cholesterol? Let's kind of focus there.
Yeah. Oh man, like I feel like we could probably do a couple series on this, but
right.
Okay, so I am not Peter Attia. Peter Attia is amazing. He's brilliant. Some of the stuff that I learned from his work, and then also, other things, but we need cholesterol. We need cholesterol to function. The lipid packets that are in our body, they provide energy They insulate. I think one of the biggest things to focus on is that they insulate our neurons or our wiring in the brain. And this is called myelin sheath. The myelin sheath is a fatty tissue that kind of insulates your brain nerves, kind of like electrical wires. You've got the electrical wires, and then you've got that coating that goes along the wires. What that coating does, just like electrical current, because our brain is electrical, it insulates the electrical flow and helps that flow run smooth. When you have a degradation in fatty tissue, because the brain is made up of 60% fat, and you see this in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's patients, when you have a degradation, or when you have these issues, you see a degradation in myelin sheath. And the myelin sheath, if you lack insulation, you lack proper neuronal function, like your nerve function. So your thoughts, your executive function, how your brain thinks and connects, your executive, processing. So cholesterol is important because that's what's making up a lot of this fat around these nerves. And the same thing goes for the rest of the body. What they've also seen, this is funny, when I used to sell lipid medication many years ago, we used to talk about the Framingham study. But what's interesting now is that the results of the Framingham study that's been going on for years is they're actually showing that you need the cholesterol because it helps prevent neurocognitive decline, and that there's not a direct correlation to low cholesterol reducing heart disease. The devil's in the details on this because, and I've said this before, not too much, not too little, always in the middle. That's where we want to live. So we need cholesterol, but what type of cholesterol? So I'm going to try not to lose anybody real quick here. 60 to 70% of cholesterol is produced in the liver, in the body, not from food we ingest. 30 to 40% is produced by the food we ingest. So we have some control through our diet. But going back to what we talked about with stress and inflammation, that cholesterol is being produced in the body. And it's deploying cholesterol because it thinks it needs energy to mobilize. So think about it this way. If I'm stressed and I think I'm running from something, the body's going to produce cholesterol because it's under stress, thinking it needs energy for something to mobilize. So 67% in the body, 30 to 40 is from food. Now to get more detailed, you have HDL, LDL, trig. Those are the standard labs that we are told to take every year in our annual physicals. And that's antiquated because LDL really doesn't mean anything unless you fraction it, you tease it out. You look at what type of LDL. So, and then the second part to this is that LDL is not a direct correlation to heart disease or heart attacks. They've actually found that HDL and your triglycerides ratio has a better indicator, as well as your blood sugar, to heart disease than just looking at an LDL level. Because trigs are elevated, they're bad cholesterol in some sense, right? So you want your I hope I'm not losing people because there's a lot to this, but like you want your HDL trig ratio to be half. So if you have let's make easy math. If you have 150 trig, you want a 75 HDL, if I'm doing the math right.
Yeah, that works. Yeah.
Am I losing you? Yeah. Okay. So it's like, yeah, if you have 120 trig, you want like a 60 HDL. So like a 2-to-1 ratio. So basically, your HDL and your trig are really important to look at heart disease, that ratio. Your LDL is not as important as when you look at your blood sugar and your insulin levels and that other cholesterol ratio. But now let's kind of get into the weeds a little bit more with LDL. There are other labs that the standard labs don't look at. And this is called an NMR. I feel like people are going to have to just rewind this a lot too to hear it back. But NMR, which is basically a fractionated cholesterol panel that's going to look at your LDL count, which is LDL-C. It's going to look at your LDL-P, which is your particle size. So it's looking at the count and the size of the LDL. And then it's going to look at things like VLDL and other types of components that are going to give you a better view of exactly what that LDL looks like, right? The more buoyant your LDL, the better. The more tight and small the LDL, not so good. If it's really dense particle LDL, that's the inflammatory LDL that's causing atherosclerotic damage in the arteries. What they've also looked at, going a little deeper in the weeds, is that when this LDL or cholesterol is being deployed and creating plaque, that's not the disease issue. The issue is that the body thinks there's arterial damage, and it's going to paint the walls of the arteries with this cholesterol to protect it, which in turn turns into occlusion in the arteries or blockage. The other two biomarkers that you want to make sure you get, actually three, that you want to get done on your lipid panel that's not on the regular standard panel is your oxidative LDL, because that's what I was just talking about, right? There's regular LDL, but then there's oxidative or damaged LDL. So you want an ox-LDL readout, you want an ApoB readout, and an Lp(a). These are all bigger indicators to risks of heart disease than just running HDL, LDL, trig. So I want to back up. I'm going to back up and summarize all of it, because I know this is why people get overwhelmed, right? Because it's like, I don't have to know all this stuff. So I'm going to go back to the top. You can listen back to how I said all this works, but I'm going to go back to the top. HDL trig ratio. Your trig to HDL 2-to-1. Okay, or less. You want high HDL. Your LDL readout needs to be more fractionated, so you need to get an NMR lipoprotein test. You have to request it. Then you also want to add ox-LDL, ApoB, and Lp(a). And then you're going to take that with your physician and also put it next to your HbA1c and your blood sugar. And your insulin. Did I kind of summarize that? So I don't want to lose people.
It's good.
Okay.
No, I got that down. I think the first part makes a lot of sense in terms of trigs and HDL, the 2-to-1 ratio. Did you say we want the HDL to be so with that ratio do we want it to be like over? I know it's 2-to-1, but do we want it to be higher or lower, or as long as it's 2-to-1, it doesn't matter?
Well, if it's 2-to-1, then it's putting you in a best state to not have heart risk, right? Like as long as you can get 2-to-1. So you want it buoyant. Like I think my last HDL level was like 75 or 80. And my trigs were like 70 or 80. They're low. You want your trig number down and you want your HDL number up, because that buoyant HDL is really healthy for you. But as long as you have that 2-to-1 ratio or better, you're in a good place for having a lower risk of heart disease.
And then it sounds like, so on the LDL, it's a little bit more
nuanced.
Kind of to it, because for most of us, we need to request the MNR. Did I get that right?
NMR, yeah. It's a nuclear magnetic resonance. It's too scientific, but basically it's a fractionated cholesterol. It breaks it out in pieces, so it can look at your particle counts, your particle size, right? And then it's going to break it into things like I said, LDL, VLDL. There's a bunch of different pieces that are part of that NMR.
Yeah. Why do we have to request that? Like, why? So I'm curious, like, why that isn't just standard kind of care when we go on. Why do we need to request that?
This is where my mind was going next. So, because the story up until recently was if you have high LDL on your regular panels, you need to take a statin or a lipid lowering agent. The problem is, like I said about the Framingham study and other things, is that LDL is actually not directly tied to heart disease. It's way more nuanced. And if you're not looking at the fractionated testing of what LDL matters, because like I said, it's the dense particles and a lot of them that cause the most damage to the arteries. So if you're giving a statin or a cholesterol lowering agent and you have good buoyant LDL, technically, and this is what I've read, right? I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, then you really don't really need them, because you were talking about before, butter, right? Extra virgin olive oil, animal fats. If you're eating things that are raw grass-fed butter and pasture-raised, grass-fed beef. These are going to raise cholesterol, but it may not necessarily be the bad cholesterol. And this is why there's all these people talking about this on social, media. The devil's in the details. We thrived off of eating these things for thousands of years, and they didn't cause heart disease necessarily. But if you're eating oxidized fats, so canola oil, sunflower oil, animals that were raised inhumanely that are eating corn and soy and processed wheats that are causing inflammation in their body that you're now ingesting from their fat, that you're high heating, causing more oxidation in the fat, you're ingesting that all. And that's what's causing lipid changes potentially, right? Because we said 30-40% is diet. Or the foods are causing inflammation and they're making the liver release this cholesterol into the bloodstream. So the devil's in the details on this, right? It's like eat the grass-fed, the pasture-raised. Don't eat what's that butter like? I remember there was like a margarine and Crocs or whatever the heck, all the crap in the tubs. Don't eat that stuff. Don't use that stuff. Use grass-fed butter, Kerrygold, or from your farm. Use extra virgin olive oil. Use beef tallow. Use, don't high heat your meats all the time, right? Because these are things that could oxidize fats. Hopefully I answered that. Does that make sense? Why you should get it?
Yeah.
Because you're going to be prescribed a statin or a lipid agent for something that you probably don't really need it for if you're not looking at these in real detail. And the other things I mentioned, like ApoB, Lp(a), HDL trig ratio, and oxidized LDL are better things to be looking at to understand your risk of heart disease.
Makes sense.
I didn't lose
you,
did I?
No.
All right.
Makes sense. So I just want to pick up on one point you said there, because I think it's kind of in a way related to what we talked about lab work, but kind of a little bit off track as well, because it's kind of focused on what you said there in terms of eat the grass-fed butter, extra virgin olive oil, etc. And there's a lot of research coming out about seed oils, canola oil, sunflower oil, etc. And it's interesting because because some people are in the camp of like, oh no, they're fine. Some people in the camp of like, super inflammatory, etc. Personally, I don't go near them. Through everything that I've learned, meet me kind of 12 years ago, and I'm a completely different person because I didn't have access to the information I do now. And there's this one person I follow on. Well, I say follow, like for some reason, I think it's because like the algorithm picks up like I follow health, and he produces content on quote unquote health, right? And he shares studies on like how the avoidance of like seed oils, etc., is like overhyped, etc. And then but when you actually look into it, he's I think it's like CEO or CTO or something of a company that's product it's like a protein drink, and the protein drink has like rapeseed oil, etc. in it. And so it's just like, so like I think I commented one day of like, would you be saying this? Would you be sharing this information if like, because he's got an ulterior motive, right? Like I might share that with a friend or a family member, but I don't have an ulterior motive, right? Like I'm researching much like you are. I'm trying to go through the weeds of health to find actually a consensus, the truth of what's going to help us to lead our best, healthiest lives. And so kind of on that point, I just wanted to explore if you have any insight into why things like seed oils, etc., and some of the other examples you gave are bad for lipids and kind of, I guess, inflammation and overall health in general.
Yeah. So number one, there's a lot of conflict of interest on social media. I think you're right. Like there's a lot of people promoting certain things, good or bad, and they mean well, but sometimes there's a conflict of interest. And to back it up a little bit, like I grew up in an Italian household. My mom used to fry chicken cutlets in canola oil, cauliflower fried in canola oil. We used to eat a lot of this stuff. And let me tell you, I did not feel good eating this stuff. And my skin didn't look good. My body didn't feel good. I think, again, the devil's in the details here. we need to have an accurate amount of omega-3 fatty acids and omega-6 fatty acids. We need to have both. And within seed oils is omega-6 fatty acids. And this goes back to like the extremism of our world. People do extreme. It's always extreme. Like eat protein. Now you need to eat 200 grams of protein. That's not good for you. You should be eating just adequate amounts. Live in the middle. I believe a little bit of seed oils is not going to kill you, and it's not going to give you heart disease if you're doing all the other things that you should be doing in your health, because a little bit of omega-6 fatty acids are fine. But, big but, the problem is that seed oils are in almost everything people eat today. If we understand that 60 to 70% of the American diet is called the standard American diet, which is highly processed foods and ultra processed foods, guess what's in all those foods? Processed seed oils, sugar.
Seed oils.
Okay, the two offenders.
The big two. Yeah.
Right. And this is the problem, is like the devil's in the details, because we extreme everything. You gotta, if it's in everything you're eating, it's a problem. But if you're having a little bit of it and 95% of your diet is clean food, it's not going to kill you, because you're doing all the other things. You're exercising, you're getting good sleep, you're not eating a lot of sugar, you're eating vegetables and proteins. Italians eat seed oils. When I was in Italy, multiple times, they're using seed oils. The difference is, and some of them are using them not so good, like they're catching on over there to sell crappy oils, but they're not high heating them all the time. They may be just adding them into little things. And they're not highly processing these oils necessarily. But I think that's the problem too, is that most of these oils are highly processed. And if they're highly heated and they're highly processed, they're oxidated. And this goes back to what I said about oxidated cholesterol and ox-LDL. You're oxidating the fat. If you're high heating it above its smoking point or its heating point, you're oxidizing the fat, making it inflammatory for the body. That's the problem. So yes, you want to avoid these fats if you're constantly eating them in all your foods. But it goes back to the same thing. Eat real food and you avoid most of all this stuff that's killing you anyway. If you're eating fruits and vegetables and healthy proteins and fats, you're not really ingesting much of this. So if it sneaks in a little bit, it's not going to kill you. You know, the other thing is, most restaurants use canola oil and seed oils to cook their foods. They're also using not so good butter. So when you're going to restaurants, that's another thing you have to be aware of, is that you've got to ask them, what are you using? And can you use extra virgin olive oil? Or can you use tallow? Or can you use grass-fed butter if you have it to cook my food? Or don't use any of the fats. So if you're someone that eats out a lot, you're probably coming across this too. Or if you're someone that's using proteins and powders and you don't know how to read labels, chances are you're coming across this too. So the sum of all this is that the poison is in the dose. But people on social media want to glamorize and extreme it because they are selling something. I'm not advocating for seed oils. I don't eat them, but sometimes they're in certain foods, and you just have to be aware of that. Does that kind of help you? Like,
yeah, no, it does, and I guess it's like with anything kind of we're talking about within health, like the quality matters. So like if we are talking about seed oils, again, personally, based on kind of what I've seen, like I've eliminated that, and as you said, like my skin's cleared up and kind of all this different things. But then I have seen on like some labels, because as you also kind of alluded to, you got to check the labels of like everything, right? Like so some products might say like organic cold pressed sunflower oil, right? So if we are going to make that choice, it sounds like then for like the quality matters of like that as an example, rather than maybe your standard quote unquote seed oil that's in like your restaurant, etc.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Because I know Ben Greenfield, who's a big health advocate, shares a company that makes like a pressed seed oil of some kind. I didn't look at all the stuff they're selling, and he's promoting it. But it's because it's processed the way that you're talking about. It's minimally processed, right? Just like olive oil. If it's extra virgin olive oil, cold pressed, it's minimally processed oil, which is better, obviously, than ultra processed oil. And usually the ultra processed oil is the high heated stuff.
Going back to a little bit on like the lab work side, so one thing that I kind of seen, and if you go back to the beginning of our conversation, you also said it in like, also when we got our lab work through, there's like a range. One thing that I kind of heard is that just because there's a range, the standard practice of care is to get between that range, but just because you get between that range doesn't mean that it's optimal. What would you
Correct.
say about what would you say about that? Because somebody might then go to their MD, their doctor, etc., and they're like, oh, you're fine, you're between the range, but they may still feel like really, they still maybe experiencing fatigue, etc., like these other symptoms, etc., but they're still between the range. So like, what do people do, and kind of curious to explore this kind of range versus optimal kind of conversation.
Yeah, so this is where a functional integrative physician is really important, because they understand the interaction between different biomarker levels. So even if you're in range, and I remember actually in my own situation, I was like, oh, that's in range, but where one of my markers was compared to some other markers in my labs didn't look good in terms of optimal, right? So yes, ranges are there to kind of keep you somewhat titrated to health, but a good part of pretty much all of the allopathic or conventional doctors aren't trained that way. They're trained to look at the organ system and then look at the levels and then prescribe a medication. They don't study how they interact and how they can crosstalk. And so that's why functional integrative doctors are more important for this. So yes, if you're still feeling crummy and let's say your blood sugar's at 92 and you're below 99 and you're not feeling good, it's definitely worth having a conversation to understand, like, if I got it down to 85, or if I changed a couple other things in my diet, would it change the way I feel? Would I feel less tired? Would I have less erratic activity in my blood peaks and troughs? And I'm just one example, right? So I think it's really important. That's also why blood work is really important, because all of these biomarkers are not meant to be looked at in a silo. They're meant to be looked at against other ones. And we were talking about a little bit with lipids and blood sugar, right? It's like you kind of have to look at all of these to understand, okay, if I have a high LDL, but I have really good blood sugar, insulin, and HbA1c, and no ox-LDL or very low ox-LDL, right? You start to put all these pieces together in a web. Now that LDL doesn't become as intense because you have all these other supporting factors that prove otherwise, versus just looking at one thing. So it's important to look at the labs holistically, have an integrative practitioner, see if you can move out of that range, right? Because sometimes, like another example, your thyroid function is a very finicky hormone. That is really important to get it right where it needs to be, and sometimes more aggressive than what the ranges tell you, because people will feel depressed or they'll feel hyperactive or have erratic heart rate and their hair will thin out, right? They're noticing signs and symptoms even though they may be in the range. So you really have to titrate more specifically when you're having signs and symptoms, and you need someone to help you do that. And a lot of times, unfortunately, the conventional doctors are just going to throw another med on you. They're not going to help you actually figure out what's causing it. And now you're dealing with another imbalance from the side effects of that medication. So this is how it compounds for people and gets really kind of sticky,
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Does the range differ person to person as well?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of sense to like the bio-individuality of people, because what I'm living in my environment is different than what you learn living in your environment. My age is different than your age. My lifestyle is different than your lifestyle. My DNA is different than your DNA, or your genetics, excuse me. So yeah, I think everyone's bio-individual, and this is why, again, functional medicine and integrative medicine and Chinese medicine is very important, because it takes into account the holistic picture of the individual and their lifestyle, versus what conventional science does, which is groups everybody together and creates ranges and then goes, yeah, you don't fit the masses. You take this pill, like, I don't want to know about what you do every day, or just take this pill. You're not in range. It's simplifying medicine, right? So they can just keep managing people and you pay for it. One other thing I think that's important to mention about all of this is that while genetics play about 10% role in my research, it plays about 10% in disease, it's still important for people to do a genetic testing, because your genetic testing is going to tell you the roadmap of how you need to live against your genetics. And that's your epigenome, right? The epigenome is what lays on top of your genetics. It's like the piano and the keys, and you're pressing the keys to activate the genes, the epigenome. Our lifestyles impact epigenome, which impacts our genetic expression. And so getting a genetic test is really important, because it's going to tell you what you may be at risk for if you don't live or abide by healthy principles, whether you're at risk for heart disease or mental health issues or neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. Okay, these are all things we should look at our genetics, our methylation pathways, all these things, so that we understand how to influence them. The truth of the matter is that the answer is always the same: healthy lifestyle, move, eat well, sleep well, manage stress. It always goes back to that. But let me give one example of this. There's a gene called ApoE. What they looked at is ApoE4 and ApoE44 are increased risks of Alzheimer's from 4 or 6 to 10x risk. So I'm a 3-4 ApoE. That means I have like a 4 to 6-fold risk of getting Alzheimer's disease or neurodegenerative diseases. If I had an ApoE44, I'm at a 10, I think it's around a 10-fold, maybe even a 12-fold risk. Don't quote me, but it's pretty high, of getting Alzheimer's if I don't manage my health. Blood sugar, foods, lifestyle, medicine, right? So it's important for people to get a genetic test. Now, the other thing I want to say, and I know we're going long here, but the other thing I want to say is, when you get a genetic test, make sure you have someone go over it with you. Do not, if you're someone that's anxious, do not do it on your own and just dive down the rabbit hole thinking something's wrong with you. And then you want to have someone help you understand how to manage your genetic testing. There are 2 companies that, now if you're someone who could deal with this and handle it mentally, there's 2 companies that will help you get your DNA, your genetic tests read out so you can understand your risk. So first you want to go to like 23andMe and get your genetic testing, or go to a genetic testing company. And then you want to upload your data to a company called StratGene by Ben Lynch, Dr. Ben Lynch, or Genetic Genie. And that will give you a readout of your risk potential from your genetics.
You beat me to it. I was going to ask what companies do you recommend? But
Sorry,
obviously, no worries.
You can do like a 23andMe or something. Yeah,
it's 23andMe. Cool.
Yeah,
because there's a few different solutions.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think Dr. Ben Lynch's StratGene, you have to pay for it. You probably also could run your genetic testing through him and then just have them do the readout. Or you could go to Genetic Genie, which is what I did, and I just uploaded my SNPs from my genetic testing from 20.
What haven't we spoken about when it comes to blood work, lab work, etc., that you think is important to highlight in the time we have left?
Yeah, so I think a simple thing is vitamin D levels. They always usually get tested, but look at your vitamin D levels. Vitamin D is a hormone, even though it's called vitamin D, and it has a lot to do with your cardiac health, calcification in the artery reduction, bone health, mood support. So vitamin D is like one of the most important things to look at. Now, obviously, you want to get out in the sun, but if you need to take a supplement, fine. But get your vitamin D levels checked, because most people are deficient in vitamin D. And then your iron and ferritin levels are really important.
Sorry, Rich, is there a range for vitamin D, or does that depend on, again, as we've been saying, like the personalization, so it depends person to person?
There is, but and I have to look at the numbers. I forget the actual range, to be honest. But what I do know is that, vitamin D fluctuates like anything else. And about 60 to 70% of people are actually probably more deficient in vitamin D. You really couldn't have, and again, I'm not a physician, but it's really hard to overdose on vitamin D. So, you can look at the ranges, but my advice is eat pasture-raised eggs, eat, get out in the sun, eat healthy fats. These are ways that you can help your vitamin D levels. But
And then
get them
iron, you were
checked.
saying.
What's that?
And then you were saying, before I interrupted you, you were saying about iron and there was something else.
Yeah, I think iron and ferritin levels are really important to look at. Again, I mean, your physician will look at things, and these are usually included in your panels, but they're good to look at. Another really big one that I think is really important is your inflammation markers. So your HSCRP, which is an inflammatory marker for cardiac risk, which is a little bit better than your CRP. So HSCRP, which is an inflammation. And then if you're someone who's subjected to like autoimmune conditions, IL-6, which is interleukin 6, and TNF alpha, these are both related to autoimmune conditions like IBD, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, all these types of autoimmune conditions. So you want to look at stuff like that. And then your testosterone, estrogen, right? These your hormones. You want to do hormone testing because you really want to understand your hormones. There's a company called the Dutch Test that creates the Dutch Test, and Precision Analytical that creates the Dutch Test that looks at hormone levels. So that's something else you want to do. Your cortisol is a really good indicator of chronic stress, and cortisol has a diurnal daily flow, kind of the way that it flows. It kind of creates like a little bit of high peak in the morning and then drops off at night. You want to look at your cortisol. You can do a urine or saliva test to look at that. Excuse me, your blood work. I don't know if is there a urine one? There's a saliva one. There's a blood one. Yeah, I think it's those two. So you could do those as well. So I think those are kind of the big ones, right? It's like to look at some of the stuff we talked about earlier, which is really early stuff that can really help you change your health. And the ones I just discussed now, some of them are already in your lab testing. You just want to look at them. And some of the other ones I mentioned, you may have to add on.
Rich, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. So much there. And yeah, as we kind of alluded to, it would be good for people to kind of go back through and take notes. I took a ton of notes as we were in conversation. But overall, and it'd be good to kind of get your thoughts on this. It sounds like do the lab work, do the blood work, get the data, look at it. Then actually, like a lot of the solutions to these things are actually, it comes back to like what it means to be human, so like moving our body, eating real food, sleeping well, etc. And so like when we can do those, when we basically do those things, we're gonna 9 times out of 10 become the healthiest, best versions of ourselves. Sure, there will be individual cases where maybe we have to add different strategy as well, but it sounds like those are the basics to help improve these markers.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Your health is a moving target, and your labs are a moving target, and you're ever changing. So it's really important to get your labs done. I get them done 2 to 3 times a year. Maybe I'm a little excessive, but I would recommend.
I was going to ask, like, how often?
Yeah.
So 2 to 3 times a year.
Yeah, I recommend it. I mean, especially for someone that's got health issues or someone that's really interested in trying to maintain their health and look at things that they're changing in their health or their lifestyle. But at minimum 1 time a year. I would definitely do 2 times a year if you're someone that's really trying to track stuff. And yes, it's a sliding scale. Your health is a sliding scale. I think one of the things that social media sells is this perfectionism, right? Like things are static. This person's really healthy. This person's not. But the reality is that your life changes on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. And those changes have an impact on your health. Your environment, your food, your stress, traumas, all these things create an impact in your health. So yes, be the steward. Look at your labs at least once a year. Have someone help you navigate them. Start to take a little bit of, I think the most important is take ownership of understanding some of them, not all of them, but just understand where certain things need to be and how you feel. And you'll feel much more empowered to make changes without, reacting and just looking for a medication.
Man, like, thank you so much. Like, I'm sure you will be back on in the future because you explain things in such of an easy way for people to understand. Like I've listened to experts like Dr. Peter Attia on his podcast, and obviously like the Huberman Lab podcast. And sometimes we can get caught up in like in the weeds, like what I can't even say it that well. HbA1c, right? You're like, what's that? But you've kind of walked us through actually what it is. It's holistic relationship to blood sugar, insulin, and the other biomarkers as well. And I think that is what's going to help people. That's not to say like other people aren't doing great work as well. Of course they are, but I think the more we can simplify this for us everyday folks to therefore make changes in our lives, the better. So
thank you.
I'm sure you will be back on. I'm sure you'll be back on in the future. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Before you go, where can people stay in touch with you if they want to check out all of your work, what you're doing? Please share Vital Habits. Over to you, my friend.
Yeah, thank you. So first, thank you so much. If I lost anybody, reach out to me, reach out to Luke. Like, I'm more than happy to answer some of this. I'm not a scientist. Those guys are brilliant. But to your point, I have to simplify things to make sense of them too for myself as a person who's a patient. And so I may not be getting in the weeds, but it's enough for people to hopefully understand how to manage it. You can find me at thevitalhabits.com. I'm also on Twitter, Instagram, but I've started to put more energy into my YouTube channel where I do long form content to go into a lot of things like this that I've started. My newsletter is the best place to follow along on this health journey with me and others, which we'll also include in the show notes, because every Friday I drop a lot of educational tips, lived experiences from my personal and professional career. And that's a good place to get a repository of information. So you can find me there. And if you want personalized coaching, one-on-one lifestyle coaching, I also offer that, which helps you really dig into making lifestyle changes and making it easy for you. So you can also fill out that form on my website, and we can set up time if it's a good match for us to work together as well.
Amazing. I link that all down below. Once again, Rich, thank you for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Luke. Appreciate it.
Hey, everyone. I hope that you've enjoyed that episode, that conversation with Rich. It was such an amazing experience to have that conversation with him and dive into everything blood work, everything labs. I learned so much. I learned actually what metrics matter the most, because when we do get our labs done, when we do get our blood work done, as discussed, sometimes it's like there's all these numbers right on this piece of paper, on this sheet, and because the medical system and doctors are usually so busy that they don't really have time to go through it with us in great depth, great detail, like what do these numbers mean? What do I do with this information? So hopefully this episode gives you insight in actually what you can do with the information when you go and have your labs done, have your blood work done. So that is my homework for you actually in this episode, at the end of this episode, is to go and get those tests done, go and get some labs, go and get some blood work done. Use this episode as a guide. Again, it's not medical advice, but it's knowledge and wisdom that you can use to help you to tune in with your own body and ultimately start to become more of your own doctor and take responsibility for your health. I link the previous episode I done with Rich as well that focuses more on the mindset needed to become your own doctor. So check out the show notes for that, alongside some other resources that Rich has shared with us, or kindly shared with us. So thank you for staying around. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning into this podcast. I hope that you found it as insightful, as valuable as I did. Go and get those labs done, and I look forward to talking to you in the next episode.